As one of the ultimate truths of the automotive world goes, once said by James May himself, it's more fun to drive a slow car fast than a fast car slow. But to his quote, you might as well add that it's even more fun to modify a slow car so it can actually drive fast. One of the earliest examples of such date back to the 1920s in the United States, during their Prohibition era. In order to meet the unrelenting demand, even despite the ban, so-called bootleggers turned to modifying their rather unassuming vehicles by fitting bigger carburetors, boring out the cylinders, beefing up the suspension, and sometimes even swapping in larger engines. All of that just to haul their product as fast as possible and, when necessary, even outrun the law. Eventually, Prohibition was repealed, the bootleggers' runs evolved into America's most popular motorsport, and the thirst for speed never disappeared and only spread across the globe. With every new phenomenon in automotive history, it was only a matter of time before someone made it fast. The compact Volkswagen Golf became the robust Golf GTI, bringing the hot hatch segment into the masses, while the originally off-road GMC Jimmy morphed into the sporty and now street-only GMC Typhoon, essentially creating the high-performance SUV as we know it. But this trend didn't go over the new body style that emerged in the mid-80s, the minivan. In today's video, we'll talk about concepts, prototypes, track-made weapons, as well as production-made fast minivans. But first, let's start off with a question. What were the very first minivans? Two candidates immediately come to mind: the Renault Espace as Europe's first minivan, and Plymouth Voyager, along with its rebadge known as the Dodge Caravan, as the first in the US. Originally conceived as the epitome of everyday practicality, it was pretty obvious that they had no sporty intentions in them whatsoever. But the first, although slightly clumsy attempt to make a minivan quicker came from the Americans, when for just 2 model years, Chrysler dropped a turbocharged 2.5-liter inline-4 into their minivans, and also slapped a couple of stickers on the body for good measure. Back then, Chrysler knew how to squeeze out some impressive numbers from their humble inline-4s with the help of a turbo. Though calling the Turbo Caravan and Turbo Voyager minivans sporty is a slight exaggeration. With 150 horsepower pushing about 3,000 pounds, the turbo was there mostly just to boost its hauling capacity by delivering some extra low-end torque. But other than that, it did run noticeably quicker than their own larger displacement versions. And for a while, the world of fast minivans pretty much stopped on that note. That is, until the silence was shattered by one hell of a second-gen Renault Espace, created as a celebration of 2 big events for the company: the upcoming first anniversary of the Espace and Renault-Williams' 1993 season Formula One victory. But instead of settling for some special edition badging and whatnot, Renault pulled together engineers from Williams and Matra, the very company that came up with the minivan concept, which Renault turned into the Espace we know, and transformed the van almost beyond recognition. Crafting a carbon fiber and aluminum chassis, fitting Formula One style suspension, widening the track by 10 inches, putting it on F1 slicks, and topping it off with a massive rear wing. The most impressive part of it all being the 3.5-liter V10 paired with a 6-speed sequential straight from the championship-winning FW15C, mounting it as the traditions of Formula One require, in the middle, with a second row of carbon bucket seats tucked besides it. Thus, in 1994, the Renault Espace F1 was born, sharing more DNA with a race car rather than a family hauler. The engine churned out 789 horsepower, and at 2,400 pounds, the super minivan hit 60 miles per hour in 2.8 seconds, 120 in 6.3, and maxed out at 194 miles while pulling up to 2 Gs in the process. Given its odd, one-off nature, it's pretty obvious that the prototype never entered any serious competitions, and its runs were purely demonstrative. The Espace F1 was built in 2 examples, and all of the numbers mentioned earlier belonged to only one of them. The second Espace F1 featured the same V10 and even sported a more aesthetic-looking body kit, but the second example was merely a roller, made for marketing purposes, as by then, The Espace was beginning to face its competition, including the 1994 Eurovan platform and its derivatives, Citroën Evasion, Fiat Ulysse, Lancia Zeta, and Peugeot 806. Folks from the latter company decided to go one step beyond Renault, turning their 806 into the first and the only proper racing minivan, prepped for 24 hours of Spa-Francorchamps. The idea to send the minivan racing came from Pascal Whitmier, head of advertising for Peugeot Belgium and a racer himself. During one of the meetings, Pascal proposed advertising the new 806 by sending it into the 24 Hours of Spa in the Pro Car category. Work on the project began rather late in May, with the race starting on July 29th. And Pascal decided to hand the building process over to a Belgian company known as Kronos Racing. And Kronos faced a tough deadline: prepare the 806 for Spa from zero in just about 3 months. And yet, they actually pulled it off. The resulting 806 Pro car was a Peugeot parts bin Frankenstein. The shell was the only thing it shared with the factory version, and even that was lightened and fitted with a roll cage. The suspension came from a Peugeot 405 Super Turismo, and the 2-liter engine was fitted from a rally-spec Peugeot 306 Maxi. The engine produced 280 horsepower in a minivan weighing just over a ton. And in that shape, the minivan entered the 1995 endurance race, with Whitmier himself being one of the pilots, running number 86. Its rivals were BMW 3 Series, Audi 80 Quattro, and Honda Accord, whose pilots didn't exactly welcome a minivan on the track. Early on, the 806 showed some promise, qualifying 12th out of 46. But with Kronos having pretty much zero time left to test the van's reliability, disaster struck. The impressive qualifying pace was slowed by a multitude of failures, brakes having issues in the first hour of the race, then a differential failing, engine mounts being damaged, and by hour 10, the engine itself gave up. The car was out, and with it ended the rather short story of the minivans on 24 Hours of Spa. But enough about the French. How about the other side of the Atlantic? The idea of a fast minivan actually stuck around with the Americans. In the new trend for minivans, other American makers followed Chrysler's lead, including Ford, whose lineup saw the appearance of the Windstar in 1995, eventually replacing their earlier, not the most popular attempt at the segment, the Aerostar. While the Aerostar stuck around competing with the Chevy Astro and its rebadged twin, GMC Safari, the new Windstar aimed directly at Chrysler's minivans, by then in their 3rd generation. Built on a stretched Ford Taurus platform and borrowing its Vulcan and SX V6 engines, the Windstar had pretty much nothing to show when it came to its dynamics. Still, Ford and a few other companies did try out the idea of a sporty minivan. At the time, Ford's lineup included the popular sports sedan Taurus Super High Output, SHO for short, or SHO if you prefer, powered by a 3-liter V6 co-developed with Yamaha. Given the minivan's platform was similar to that of the sports sedan, turning a Windstar into its high-performance version meant less labor applied. Ford's Special Vehicle Engineering division got to work and unveiled the 1995 Showstar concept, installing the engine and a 6-speed from Taurus SHO, along with stiffer sports-tuned suspension and 17-inch wheels. Yet, after debuting at the Detroit Auto Show, the Showstar remained as a one-off. Why is that, you may ask? First, by the late 90s, Ford decided to pivot away from minivans and prioritize crossovers and SUVs, including the by then beloved by many American families Ford Explorer, which soon enough would prompt Ford to exit from the US minivan market altogether. Second, the original sports sedan was upgraded. The 3rd-gen Taurus SHO ditched the 3-liter V6 for a 3.4-liter V8. Keeping the now outdated V6 was pointless, and yet attempting to shoehorn the newer V8 into the minivan on an older platform sounded awesome but utterly impractical. An even more radical version of a sporty minivan came to life when Saleen founder Steve Saleen, racer Bob Bonduran, and actor Tim Allen, a big car enthusiast while at it, teamed up in 1995 to establish RRR Speed Lab. The RRR crew's original goal was to put Saleen on the map through motorsport, specifically the 24 Hours of Le Mans. But the lunatic minivan they've created, from a standpoint like this, would only be considered a PR stunt. And it appeared from Alan's question: if a real man was to drive a minivan, what would it be like? The answer to that rolled out in 1996, receiving a wide body kit with carbon body panels and Saleen wheels. The stock 155 horsepower 3.8-liter V6 got a supercharger, with claimed output in the whereabouts of 250 to 300 horsepower range. RRR planned a limited run of these for sale, but after building just one Saleen Windstar, the idea was shelved. Two reasons. First, a supercharged sports minivan couldn't compete for attention amidst the sheer popularity of the SUVs. Even the Saleen XP8 Explorer from the last video, one that they've actually made a limited run of, would have been way more popular in comparison. Second, by 1999, Ford was preparing to update the Windstar, making a limited run right before a redesign very much unnecessary. But other than the madman from RRR, once the refreshed Windstar actually came out, Kenny Brown Performance decided to take it on with a mission: build a minivan cool enough for dads to drive. The Windstar dropped 1.5 inches on 18-inch chrome wheels, and the 3.8-liter V6 got an Eaton supercharger, making around 250 horsepower and hitting 60 miles per hour in 8.4 seconds. Unlike the Showstar and Saleen one-offs, Kenny Brown's Windstar conversions were actually offered for sale, starting at $44,000. Whether anyone bought one of these is a mystery. One of these super minivans did pop up for sale once, but it's unclear if it was the original show car or a customer build. The idea of a high-performance minivan was also taken on by Oldsmobile just before it went bankrupt. In 1999, they unveiled the Oldsmobile Silhouette OSV concept, cooked up by the new Oldsmobile Specialty Vehicle division. Think Ford's SVT, but for Olds. Like the rest of the OSV concepts, the Silhouette was painted candy apple red, fitted with a nice body kit and 6-spoke wheels. While under the hood, the stock 3.4-liter V6 received intake and exhaust tweaks, pushing 210 horsepower and 270 foot-pounds of torque. But like every other OSV project, the Silhouette never left the concept stage. In the year 2000, General Motors announced its plan to discontinue the Oldsmobile brand entirely, which was carried out 4 years later. But on that note, let's rewind a couple of decades back to 1981. The aforementioned Chrysler minivans hadn't even hit production yet, and the word itself, minivan, didn't become as widespread as it is now. And Porsche was already busy creating a sports minivan way before it would fall under that category. Why would Porsche, of all brands, have to do anything with minivans? Well, such thoughts did not deter the Stuttgart engineers when it came to having a proper support vehicle. In the early 1980s, Porsche's testing department was running endurance trials in Algeria. But here's the problem. The Volkswagen T3s, used as support vehicles, simply couldn't keep up with the Porsches. Even with the mightiest engine available, a 112 horsepower 2.1-liter water-cooled flat 4, the vans were holding everyone back. So they came up with a fix, that being dropping a 3-liter flat 6 from the Porsche 911 SC under its rear hood, bolting on ventilated brakes from the 944S, and stiffening up the suspension. Also giving it 14-inch wheels from the 911 and making some extra cooling vents in the rear. After coming home from Africa, the new Porsche van caught on as a staff transport vehicle, since using Mercedes or BMWs just didn't seem right from a corporate standpoint. This Volkswagen with the heart of a Porsche was eventually taken notice of by Porsche customers as well. And given the company's rather bleak situation during their mid-80s, with their slumping sales, it suddenly seemed like putting this thing into limited production was a no-brainer. Dubbed the Porsche B32, it went on sale in 1983 with a newer 3.2-liter flat six making 231 horsepower, now featuring bumper skirts and 16-inch wheels. At 3,600 pounds, it hit 60 miles in 8.6 seconds and topped out at 119 miles per hour. And the B32 was, in fact, a genuine Porsche, as its VIN numbers prove just that. Proof that it is indeed a Porsche also came from its price tag of 145,000 Deutschmarks, which was more than two 911 Carrera 3.2s. That explains the tiny production run of just 11 units made, including 2 prototypes, with their VIN numbers still being that of Volkswagens, and 2 of these that went into the hands of a Porsche president Peter Schutz and their board member Wolfgang Porsche. But Porsche weren't the only ones jamming a flat 6 into the T3. For example, Oettinger built their own engine from the stock 2.1-liter 4, RAF used the T3 as a test bed for their power plants, and a small company called Clair specialized in swapping various 911 engines into Volkswagens, calling them Clair CT3. But when the 4th-generation transporter arrived, the later 2 companies worked together to create the Clair CT4. The big difference between the T3 and T4 was ditching the rear engine rear drive layout for a front engine front drive one. And to be fair, sticking a flat 6 up front to spin the front wheels would have been ridiculous. So in the CT4, likewise to its predecessor, the engine went back. That itself being a rough-tuned 3.6-liter twin-turbo flat 6 from the 993, good for 522 horsepower and 498 foot-pounds of torque, now driving all 4 wheels. 0 to 60 miles per hour came in at 5 seconds flat, topping out at 170 miles per hour. All of that for a pretty modest price tag of 186,000 euros. For roughly the same amount, in 2004, you could pick up a Mercedes-Benz Viano tuned by Brabus. On the inside, the van was barely changed, and yet it became a blisteringly quick vehicle for its size. While factory Vianos came with diesel inline 4s, or at best gas-powered V6s, Brabus installed a 6.1-liter V8 making 426 horsepower and 457 foot-pounds of torque, propelling this office on wheels to 60 miles per hour in 6.2 seconds. Later on, Mercedes themselves have also offered something like a fast minivan. Unveiled in 2006, the Mercedes-Benz R-Class was a pretty ambiguous vehicle. At the same time, it was part SUV, part estate, part minivan. The R-Class's identity crisis itself is good for a whole nother video. Let me know if you want to see that. Meanwhile, AMG engineers looked at this thing and thought that putting a 6.2-liter V8 in there is a great idea. The 2007-year-only R63 AMG came with adaptive air suspension, all-wheel drive, and a naturally aspirated 6.2-liter V8, putting out 510 horsepower and 465 foot-pounds of torque. And with its weight of 5,000 pounds, the 0 to 60 done in 5 seconds flat was pretty impressive. But the sheer oddity of this thing is what essentially doomed it. The AMG version of the not quite van, not really SUV stickered at nearly 90,000 bucks. And after just 200 units, the idea of a do-it-all wagon was left behind the same year it was born in. But there was one more German automaker crazy enough to build a fast family hauler, and that would be Opel. The Zafira, co-engineered with Porsche, received its OPC treatment in 2001. Other than a Zender body kit, ventilated disc brakes and 17-inch wheels, the 2-liter 4 was turbocharged to make 190 horsepower and 184 foot-pounds of torque, hitting 60 miles per hour in 8.2 seconds, and at the time becoming Europe's quickest mass-production minivan, topping out at 137 miles per hour. Its focus on being a driver's car was doubled down by not offering an automatic transmission. And the second-generation Zafira OPC stepped up, 18-inch wheels, meaner kit, and a more angry 2-liter engine, pushing 240 horsepower and 236 foot-pounds of torque, with a 0 to 60 in 7.8 seconds and a top speed of 143 miles per hour. But with the third-gen Zafira coming out in 2011, stricter Euro 5 emissions essentially wiped out the possibility of the OPC variant being made. Of all the minivans we've covered, it's fair to say that only Opel actually nailed it. They've managed to keep it a full-fledged family vehicle, they added the necessary sportiness, they put it into production, and the car itself managed to stay relevant. While the experimental Caravan Turbo lasted 2 years, and the luxurious but confused R63 AMG was up for only 1 year, the Zafira OPC was on the market for a full decade. So here's the real question. Where are the sporty minivans today? You can still walk into a showroom and buy a fast SUV or a performance wagon, so why no fast minivans? The answer lies in the very existence of those two. By the mid-2000s, crossovers were already taking over the same family all-rounder market, offering performance versions, and frankly, were just more popular. Meanwhile, wagons offered the combination of pace and practicality the fast minivan buyers actually wanted, while giving up a bit of spaciousness. The sport minivan was basically squeezed between the two. Crossovers stole the trendiness, and wagons stole the actual driving enthusiasts, forcing minivans to survive to this day in their more or less basic forms. And finally, image is everything. Hatchbacks like Golf quickly became associated as a youngster's car, and SUVs, originally starting off as midlife vehicles, by now have sprawled every age and price bracket wide. Minivans evolved as well, creating a segment of VIP shuttles for the ultra-rich, especially being in high demand in Asia, where luxury MPVs may soon as well replace luxury sedans entirely. But in Europe and the US, no matter how many horses are under the hood, the minivan is still a school-run grocery getter.